especially when you're stressed and you've got a deadline and the
Mm,
exams are coming, these kind of like you're not really in a position to be able to think, take a step back and think what's the most healthy thing that if someone comes along and says, "Oh well, you need to actually make sure that the studying that you're doing is effective." For a lot of students, they're well beyond like that.
mm.
That's something that they're not going to really be able to process and actually use.
Yeah. And it's like when you're in that position and someone says to you, well, what you need to do is take a break and sleep, you kind of think, well, you just don't understand the problem I'm in. You just don't get it.
And so with sleep, I think it's yeah. How does like sleep affect like our ability to learn? Because I think for a lot of people, I mean, it's kind of like a taboo thing to talk about as a student, but the idea is that you kind of do as much as you can on as little sleep as possible. A lot of people kind
Mm.
of live off that philosophy, and you can kind of continue living off that philosophy if you ignore the fact that you're having little sleep. But
Yeah. Yeah, again, it's about whether you believe in evidence or not. So
yeah,
there's a number of things. We think of sleep as wasted time, but that's because we don't look at what actually happens. Our brain and our body are actually doing an awful lot of work when we're asleep. It's
mm,
not a time when we're not doing anything. We're just not aware of it. In terms of learning, there's three things that we do while we're asleep that are really important before. But anyway, the first thing is we clear away clutter from the previous day. So you'll encounter lots of things during the day that you don't really need to remember. So your brain codes all of the things that we come across during the day in a various number of different ways as whether it's important or not. And if it's not important, it gets cleared away while we're asleep at night. So you're refreshing your memory, clearing up space to learn the next day. The second thing that happens is we actually move the stuff that's important into our long term memory while we're asleep.
mm,
So if you're not sleeping well while you're trying to revise for an exam, you're going to forget a lot of what you revised
yeah,
because that process isn't happening. The third thing that seems to happen is we appear to problem solve while we're asleep. So if you set a really difficult problem for two groups and then you pause, stop them from working on it, you just send one group off to rest and another to sleep and then bring them back to the problem. The group who've been asleep will solve the problem much more quickly. This is why you have your best ideas in the shower first thing in the morning. So again, if you're working on difficult problems, sleep's really important to that. It'll help you solve all of that. There's also seems to be something around muscle memory in terms of musicians talk about this a lot, and there's been some research on it that if they're trying to play a difficult piece that they can't quite get the hang of, if they go and get a good night's sleep and then come back to it, it suddenly seems to be there. It's in their fingers. So so there's a lot that's happening when we're asleep. Now, on top of all of that, we also de-arouse emotions while we're asleep. So the emotions from the previous day get de-aroused while we're asleep. So we're in a better emotional state the next day. Our body also physically repairs and it tops up our glial cells with glucose while we're asleep so that we have energy for the next day. So if you're not sleeping, you're completely stripping out all of that. So you're coming into the next day, you don't have the energy levels you need. You're still carrying the emotions from the previous day. You've lost a lot of learning that all that effort that you've put in hasn't been remembered,
mm,
and you've missed out on a whole chunk of problem solving opportunity. So it really makes no sense. And over time, all you're doing is you're just degrading your health and degrading your
mm.
cognitive function because when we get tired, our brain stops functioning as well. There's a breakdown in the way that different parts of our brain communicate with each other and in the functioning of our prefrontal cortex, particularly. So what you end up with is in a situation where you're just not in a state to study to your potential at all.
Mm,
Um, so it may make logical sense to say if I give up 2 hours of study, of 2 hours of sleep to study, then I'll learn more, but you won't.
mm,
And we can see this, and if there's actually research around students studying for an exams, and we know that if students sleep 8 hours or more in the approach to an exam, they outperform those who sleep less than 8 hours, even if those sleeping less than 8 hours use the time to study.
mm.
Sleep is crucially important to our learning and our health, so it makes no sense to give it up whatsoever.
It's interesting. So, because from what you were saying about sleep, it sounds like if you're getting if you're getting less than 8 hours sleep, the amount of the studying that you're doing actually will go down the drain. So that you actively like wait like the work that you're doing kind of goes to waste if you have poor
Yeah,
sleep.
yeah. Some of it will, and it's roughly 8 hours. I mean, we're not talking about exactly. Where all these
Mm,
things are rough, and they're all on a spectrum. Different people are on a
okay.
slightly different spectrum. So it's not about getting perfect sleep, but good regular sleep absolutely means you will remember more.
Yeah.
You're far more likely to forget what you've learned if you're having poor sleep.
Mm.
Yeah.
So yeah, so there's an element of like trying to like preserve the work that we've like the work that we've been doing.
Hmm.
That's like it's not just about um if you have good well-being, looking at, and we're talking about sleep at the moment. If you don't kind of like try to optimize how you're preserving the work that you've done, then it will like go down the
Yeah.
drain,
Yeah.
which I think is I only graduated last year, and I think especially when you're stressed and you've got a deadline and the
Mm.
exams are coming, these kind of like you're not really in a position to be able to think, take a step back and think what's the most healthy thing that if someone comes along and says, "Oh well, you need to actually make sure that the studying that you're doing is effective." For a lot of students, they're well beyond like that.
Mm.
That's something that they're not going to really be able to process and actually use.
Yeah. And it's like when you're in that position and someone says to you, well, what you need to do is take a break and sleep, you kind of think, well, you just don't understand the problem I'm in. You just don't get it. And actually, the issue is that we very often, when we're in those kind of stressful situations, we do the opposite of what we actually need to do because short-term logic says to us, if I do more work, get more done and I'll be closer to the finish line. But that's because we are stressed. We can only think in the short term. And you can sometimes work longer hours. If it's, for a day or two, it's fine. It's not going to cause you a problem. But if you're doing it for weeks, it causes a problem. And actually, when we're in those really busy periods, that's when we need to do even more to look after our well-being,
Yeah.
because you've got to keep that momentum going. You've got to keep your energy levels up. And the only way you do that is by looking after your well-being. Otherwise, you just start to burn out.
Mm.
And burnout's an additional level on top of tiredness. But when burnout starts to happen, there are other neurological functions that stop working. So you've got to keep your brain working all the way through to the end of that final exam. And to do that, you've got to look after yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good point because I think a lot of the people listening, where if we're talking about high performing athletes and towards like the Olympics or whatever, it's not a surprise that they're looking after like their diet, their massages for their muscles, taking regular breaks. And I think with even with marathons, like there's that idea of like toning down the training towards the race. And when it came to like finals and exams, the from what I saw from students, the highest performing students kind of had that kind of outlook, as in it wasn't just about like about the studying, but they also had a healthy lifestyle around it to optimize. So on the day that they would be able to have an optimal performance. Like I think, and you're right in that towards like in a high pressure situation like revising for exams, it's even more important to focus on how can you look after your well-being in order to get the best out of yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. And because as well, when you're in that place, when you keep yourself in that place, you can then also make your revision way more effective.
Yeah.
You can use more effective revision techniques. You can focus much more. And so actually the revision that you're doing is going to be way more useful than if you're trying to do it tired and unable to take in what you're doing. Because all that happens then is you realize you're not taking it in because you're too tired to take it in. And now you're also anxious about the fact that it's not going in, as well as being too tired to take it in. And now we've got two barriers to you actually learning.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're rested and you're focused and you're working hard in a really effective way, then it's actually all going to go in and it's all going to stick.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think if you're in that kind of place where you're quite stressed, you really want to get this work done. I think students in that position don't want to hear that. If you just keep studying nonstop, it's actually not going to go in, and it's trying to get them to be able to like calmly hear that this isn't going to work, but there are alternatives that will work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes some of that is about knowing what effective revision practice looks like.
Yeah.
So, we know that it's really interesting that the research since the 70s has shown that when people become anxious about, let's take exams, for instance, when people become anxious about exams, they start adopting ineffective revision techniques. So these are the students who will also be doing things like rereading their notes and highlighting their notes as a way of revising, which we know doesn't work really. It's a really ineffective way of doing it. Students who are feeling more confident about the exam will tend to experiment a bit more. So because they're using different techniques to revise, it goes in because it's been coded in lots of different ways and lots of different times. But they'll also use things like retrieval practice, which where you basically test yourself and then check your answers. Spacing, explaining things to people, studying for understanding and explaining the meaning of what they're looking at, all of which means it's better, it's more firmly held in the memory. And so they learn more, and then they notice that they're learning more, and then they feel more confident. So by the time they get the exam, they really feel they've got it. So it's about that, because the other thing to remember in all of this, of course, is, if we think about applicants coming here, maybe going to do their A-level exams are generally 3 hours long.
Yeah.
That's a test of stamina as well. If you get there and you're exhausted before you pick up your pen, then how are you going to do 3 hours?
Yeah.
So you've actually got to make sure you also arrive at the exam rested, with energy, ready to go for 3 hours. So again, you've got to turn up and be able to perform. So you've got to look after yourself physically to do that.
Yeah, because you wouldn't go on a run the day before your marathon.
No, exactly. Yeah. And this is why the night before the exam, actually cramming before the exam doesn't work. Again, the evidence is pretty clear on that, unless you've done no studying at all. If you've done no studying at all, cramming is a sensible option. But if you've studied and revised for the exam, cramming the night before actually is probably going to make you perform less well. Yeah. You're better off taking the night off, doing something else, and getting a good night's sleep.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a big difference between that intense, stressful cramming and just kind of like a last glance over your notes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. That last kind of look through the day before, early evening maybe, just to remind yourself that you know it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Just to give you the confidence you've got it. And maybe just to check, was there one or two last minute things I just want to refresh, and then put it away and do something else to get yourself into a nice sleep the night before. So you arrive the next day and you've studied, you're ready, and you feel relaxed and you've got energy and you're ready to go.
It's quite interesting, because the main difference between those two approaches in that same situation is like the state of mind as you approach the notes and your like kind of well-being and how stressed you are. Because I think they're effectively doing the same thing. Well, I guess the latter person isn't going to spend hours the night before, and as they shouldn't. But yeah, I think the biggest difference is kind of how stressed you are, your anxiety, stuff that you kind of a lot of people forget is entirely linked to the academic performance the next morning.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the way we think about ourselves, what's called self-efficacy and our academic self-efficacy in this situation, your belief in your ability to do this has a big impact on your performance. And so again, if you're using things like retrieval practice in your revision, and you can see that you're getting the questions right, you can then trust that you know this stuff. You can trust that you can do it. If you've done practice tests and you're coming out okay on them, well, then you know how to do this. You can trust yourself. Whereas if you're revising in ways that aren't effective and then you're noticing it's not going in, that's just going to make you more anxious. And when you're anxious, it's much more difficult to think clearly and remember what you've studied anyway. So yeah, that it really does make a difference.
So one of the things you do talk about in the book is how important self-belief is when it comes to studying. I was wondering if you could expand on that a little bit I think there's a lot of people who are students who either think self-belief and studying are completely separate things, or think that kind of see like people who have an overwhelming amount of self-belief as like kind of like a very arrogant attitude to working, and also leads to bad academic performance.
Yeah, because there's a balance in all things.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're overconfident and you don't put in the work, then you're not going to perform as you could do. And none of this is an argument against hard work. Hard work's good for us generally, but we need to define what we mean by hard work, because overwork is not good. Working too many hours is not good, but actually focusing in your time and energy on something in a really committed way is really good for you. But I guess there's a couple of ways in which you can approach all of this. So some students kind of feel like they should know and be able to do everything straight away. And if they can't do it immediately, it's because they're a failure. It's because there's something wrong with them. It's because they're not good enough. You get all that imposter syndrome stuff. That's just not how learning works. Learning is always a process of not knowing, working at it, and then gradually becoming to understand it and to know it. It's when you come to university, it's inevitable you're going to come across some stuff that you don't understand straight away, because that's the point. If you knew all already, then it wouldn't need to take 3 years. But if you see that as just, yeah, of course, that's the process. I'm going to have to do some reading. I'm going to have to do some work on this. I'm going to have to learn it. And then in time, I will get this. Then you're fine. If you immediately go into that spiral of, I don't understand this, it must be because I'm not good enough, then it stops you from actually doing anything to help about it. Or you're so anxious that when you try to, you can't go forward anyway. So it's those kinds of thought processes that we need to kind of be careful of, because that idea that you should be able to do it all straight away, it's a false thought. There's no way
Mm,
anybody can do that.
yeah.
And becoming comfortable with not knowing is a really important part of learning. Becoming comfortable with the fact that you're going to make mistakes,
Yeah.
and that's absolutely okay, because learning has to include mistakes. Perfectionism is a trap. It's the enemy of ambition. It's the enemy of learning.
Mm.
And letting go of that and being willing to just kind of go, right, this is a process. I know if I work at it and I use the resources around me, I'll get there. Then you will, basically.
Mm. Yeah, I think I it's definitely the case for the science-based subjects, problem-solving-based subjects, but it is true for all of them. But there is a feeling of when you have like your worksheet, your problem sheet, and you look at the questions, and it says like, I know, solve this problem. You look at the problem, and you're like, this might as well be in a different language.
Hmm.
And like if you talk to programmers, mathematicians, scientists, they've all been able to kind of stay calm, because because it's also a
Mm.
feeling everyone has.
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
that's the thing that you also forget, because you think, oh well, everyone. I've literally spoken to people who've said they've done this sheet, and I'm now doing it, and I have no idea what's going on. But you don't realize that everyone goes through that feeling of
Mm.
not being able to do it, and it's it's quite literally connected, your self belief, to your performance. In If you don't believe that you can work out those
Mm.
problems, then you won't even try.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And there's other ways we can look at this. I mean, if you come across something like that and you've never come across it before, also how exciting is that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This is a whole new thing we're about to discover, a whole new thing you're going to learn. Um, and if you can get yourself to that space where finding stuff that you don't know or don't understand yet is really exciting,
Yeah,
then none of that's ever a problem.
yeah,
It's only if you do that thing of, well, I should be able to do this straight away, that
yeah.
you create a problem for yourself.